Secure transmission active. Case 404X. Classified file. Last update logged at 3:14 hours. Echo unit reported radio silence across the perimeter. No response from dispatched teams. Alert. All officers assigned to the case are missing. Repeat. None of the patrol units returned. Containment protocol initiated. This case remains unsolved.
They labeled it a simple missing persons report, a routine form typed on a slow Monday night. Leila Moore, age 29, city records clerk, had vanished on her walk home. No witnesses, no struggle. Her office security logs showed she left. At 6:03 p.m. her phone was last pinged near a back alley to blocks from her apartment. Then nothing. At first, the precinct treated it like any other case, an overworked woman, probably overwhelmed, maybe taking time off without telling anyone. But Officer Bellamy, newly transferred from the 6th District, thought something didn't add up. Lila's file looked wrong. Her employment records were missing large chunks of data. Sections were redacted, not with black bars, but as if they'd never existed. Even her birth certificate was missing from public archives. Stranger still, her badge had been scanned 3 times that day, once at the City Hall lobby, once at a restricted server room she didn't have access to, and once at Precinct 14's sub-basement. That level wasn't even active. It had been sealed since the flood in 1998. When Bellamy tried to flag the anomaly, the system logged him out. When he reported it to IT, the technician paused, visibly disturbed, then left the room, saying he needed to check something. He never came back. No one saw him leave. His workstation remained open for hours, screen frozen on an image Bellamy didn't recognize, a still frame from a surveillance feed. It showed Leila, standing alone, in the basement of the precinct, facing the wall, her back to the camera, and, just beneath her feet, a strange symbol drawn in something that looked like chalk or bone dust. Bellamy stared and felt something watching him. Bellamy didn't sleep that night. He stared at the still frame long after everyone else had gone. Home long after the screen dimmed and the office lights flickered off one by one. Lila's posture haunted him, rigid, unnatural, as if she was listening to something behind that wall. But it was the symbol below her that disturbed him most. It wasn't random. It was deliberate, intricate, an angular circle of looping, lines intersected by geometric teeth. He had never seen anything like it. The longer he looked, the more he felt the back of his neck tense, like static had crawled under his skin. When he printed the image, the symbol didn't appear. The floor beneath her was blank. Even the technician's workstation was wiped clean. The next morning, history logs erased, hard drive corrupted. The tech was declared on personal leave the next day, though no one could confirm who authorized it. Bellamy asked around. Officers shrugged. Don't push it, one warned, without meeting his eyes. But Bellamy couldn't stop. He requested access to the sub-basement. Denied. He filed for clearance through internal affairs. Denied again. 3 days later, another officer, Martinez, decided to help. They snuck down together after hours, using an old maintenance stairwell that wasn't on any current floor plan. It was colder than expected and darker. The hallway had no lights, but at the far end, they found the old door. It was slightly open, not forced, just waiting. Bellamy called Martinez's name, no answer. He stepped inside alone, heart pounding. What he saw was impossible. The walls were covered in handprints, dozens of them, burned into the stone like shadows after an explosion. And in the center of the room, something had been dug up, a square section of floor removed. Something had been underneath. Bellamy reached for his flashlight, but the beam barely cut through the thick air in the room. The space felt wrong, not just abandoned, but disturbed, like it had been watching itself for too long. In the center, the square of missing floor revealed a crude pit, no more than 4 feet deep. Inside, there were objects arranged in a tight spiral, not police equipment, not weapons, just personal things. A cracked photograph of a woman with a blurred face, a child's shoe, burnt at the edges, a badge, and a recorder, half melted but still blinking red. Bellamy hesitated, then pressed play. A man's voice crackled through, barely audible, distorted. By static, don't trust the floor plans. They change. Room wasn't here before. I saw something, then a burst of shrill noise. The device died in his hand. Bellamy turned around, breath short, but Martinez was gone. He called out, louder this time, nothing. He sprinted back through the hall, but it was longer than he remembered. At least, it felt longer when he finally reached the staircase again. It was locked from the other side. That shouldn't have been possible. He banged until his hands bruised. No answer, no signal, no Martinez. He spent the next 2 hours wandering the lower levels, finding doorways that hadn't been there before and rooms that led nowhere. When he finally emerged, it was daylight, but Martinez never did. The precinct logged it as a personal emergency. Again, no search party, no report, just a silence. Bellamy began to notice how fast things were cleaned up around here. Too fast, like the building itself refused to hold onto evidence. And the worst part, the badge he'd found in the pit, the one with dried blood on it, belonged to the first officer ever assigned to Case 404X. He vanished 12 years ago. Detective Lena Rourke didn't believe in curses. She believed in negligence, cover-ups, and bureaucratic laziness, not supernatural whispers or haunted case files. When she was transferred to Precinct 9, she wasn't briefed on Case 404X. No one mentioned the name, but she noticed a pattern: vacant desks, incomplete files, and officers who were no longer with the department without any obituary, resignation letter, or trace. Her instincts kicked in. She dug, quietly at first. No system search turned up anything on 404X. The internal directory had a digital blind spot, one specific cluster of case files that returned error messages or froze her terminal entirely. She started asking around. Most officers shrugged. Some said nothing. A few gave her looks, like she'd uttered something dangerous. It was Officer Reyes, a rookie barely 2 months in, who finally whispered, "Don't touch that case." They all disappear, one by one. Rourke smiled like it was a joke, but Reyes didn't smile back. The next day, he didn't show up for roll call. 2 days later, his locker was emptied. No mention, no inquiry, just gone. That's when she found the post-it note slipped under her keyboard. Stop asking. No handwriting. Match no fingerprint. Trace. She took it home, burned it. But the next morning, a copy was taped to her rearview mirror. That night, her power went out at exactly 4:04 a.m. Her watch stopped at that moment and stayed frozen there for the rest of the week, even with new batteries. Rourke wasn't scared, but she was alert now. She requested all archived blueprints of the precinct. Half were missing, others contradicted each other. One copy had an entire sublevel that didn't exist on the others. It was labeled Interview Room for X. She'd never seen that room, but she would find it. She waited until after hours when the precinct emptied out and the hallway lights dimmed to half power. The building had its own breath at night, pipes hissing like whispers, the hum of vending machines sounding like distant murmurs. Lena moved carefully, guided by the blueprint she had printed and folded inside her coat. The elevator didn't show a sublevel, but when she pressed the B button 5 times in quick succession and held it on the 6th, the screen flickered and a new floor appeared. For X, she hesitated only a second before stepping inside. The doors closed, but the descent felt longer than it should have. When they opened, there was no chime, just cold air, thick and unmoving. The hallway beyond was painted in a dull green hue that hadn't been used in decades, with light fixtures buzzing faintly overhead. There were no surveillance cameras, no exits, just a long hallway with numbered doors. And at the end, a metal one, Interview Room for X. It had a keypad, but it was already unlocked. Her hands trembled as she pushed it open. Inside was a small room with 2 chairs, a table, and a one-way mirror. But there were no cameras, no microphones, only a faded file folder sitting on the table. The name on the label, Rourke, how she stood frozen. She hadn't submitted any reports. She hadn't requested any interviews. Slowly, she opened the file. Inside were photos of her, candid, recent, some even taken inside her apartment. A receipt from a coffee shop she'd gone to that morning. A recording transcript of a phone call she had with her mother the previous night. But she hadn't used her work phone. Her skin went cold. Someone was documenting her, and they were already far ahead. Lena's breath became shallow. It was the kind of fear that doesn't spike or scream. It sinks, quiet and paralyzing. She placed the file back down, careful not to smudge any prints that might already be there, though she knew deep down that whoever assembled this didn't care about being found. There was something ritualistic about the folder's contents, like she was being watched not just by someone, but by something that recorded intent, not just actions. On the back wall of the room, a large corkboard was pinned with newspaper clippings, most too yellowed to read clearly, but one headline remained legible: Fourth officer in missing persons case vanishes. Beneath it, in handwritten red ink, was a date circled over and over: July 17th, the same date she received the anonymous message that led her here. This wasn't coincidence, it was orchestration. She backed out of the room, heart pounding, and noticed something she hadn't on the way in: a security camera above the door, small and painted to blend in. It blinked once, red, recording. She ran down the hallway, mashing the elevator button again and again. Nothing. The doors didn't respond. She turned back and saw that the hallway behind her was shorter than before. Rooms had vanished. Only 3 doors remained. Her footsteps echoed louder than before, bouncing off walls that now seemed closer. The lights dimmed, not flickered, dimmed, as if the building itself was breathing slower. Panicking, she opened a random door and stepped into blackness. Her flashlight wouldn't turn on. Her phone had no signal, but she heard a sound, a dragging foot, then another, breathing. Not hers. A voice, deep and without accent, whispered, "Through the dark, you shouldn't have come alone." And just like that, the door slammed shut behind her. The room was not empty. It only pretended to be. As Lena's eyes adjusted to the dark, a faint blue glow pulsed from somewhere behind her, like a heartbeat coming from the walls themselves. She turned slowly, letting her eyes trace the outlines of the space, but nothing had corners. The room seemed to bend, slightly concave, as if built inside a dome or something older. The air was thick with the scent of metal and mold, like an underground tunnel long forgotten. Her boots stuck slightly with every step, the floor damp, though no water could be seen. On the wall opposite the door, a monitor flickered to life. No wires, no sound, just grainy black and white footage. She stepped closer, swallowing the rising lump in her throat. The footage showed a man, in uniform, a police officer. He sat at a desk, his back to the camera. Then, slowly, he turned. Lena gasped. It was Officer Griggs. He had vanished in 1997, and yet here he was, alive, or at least moving. He stared directly into the camera, and then, impossibly, turned his eyes as if seeing her. "You weren't supposed to find this," he said, lips moving perfectly in sync with the words echoing from the walls. Lena stepped back, her instincts fighting her curiosity. The footage cut, static. Then Officer Ramirez, then Officer Lowell. One by one, the missing officers appeared, each turning, each speaking the same phrase. "You weren't supposed to find this," over and over, as if it were a message or a warning or a curse. Lena's hands trembled. She tried to open the door behind her, locked, no handle. Only the monitor now glowed, and from its speaker, another voice emerged, her own, Lena. "Harper, you've joined the list." Panic clawed at Lena's chest, but she forced herself to breathe slowly, anchoring her mind before it slipped into hysteria. The voice, her voice, still echoed faintly from the monitor, looping the phrase. Like a lullaby turned sinister, she backed away, heart pounding, and scanned the room again for exits, seams, any sign of weakness in the walls. Nothing. Then she remembered the name etched into her case file, for O4X. Not a suspect, not a location, a designation, a black label classification reserved for events deemed unexplainable by conventional logic. Events that weren't meant to be understood, just contained. She touched the side of her belt instinctively, but her radio crackled without life, dead. Batteries were full. Checked them herself that morning. She was alone, and not just physically, existentially. The world outside this place didn't seem to exist anymore. Her mind began to spiral, grasping at any logic, any reasoning that could explain the footage she'd seen. Maybe it was a prank, a deepfake, some government experiment gone rogue. But deep down, Lena knew better. These officers weren't dead. They weren't alive either. They were trapped, caught in a space between presence and absence, like echoes frozen in time. She pressed her palms to her temples, trying to block out the noise growing in her head. Whispers now, dozens of them, all layered atop one another, in different voices, different languages. But the same message: you found it, you found it. The monitor screen went black, but its glow remained, illuminating something carved into the wall. Behind it, scratched deep, uneven, almost frantic, a single phrase: don't investigate further. But below it, in fresh ink, her own handwriting: I had no choice. Lena stepped back, and this time, the floor beneath her shifted. The floor didn't collapse. It breathed. Beneath Lena's boots, the linoleum bulged subtly like the lungs of a sleeping beast, rising and falling in a rhythm that felt unnervingly human. She stumbled backward, pressing her back against the concrete wall, staring down as the air in the room thickened. Her vision warped, the edges of her sight vibrating like heat rising from asphalt. Suddenly, the walls began to whisper, not in words, but in memory. She heard her father's voice calling her name, the sound of a badge being pinned on her uniform for the first time. A baby crying, but she didn't have a child, or did she? The memories weren't hers, or maybe they were. She blinked, gripping her own arms, nails digging into her skin, just to anchor herself to something real. Then, a flash. On the monitor, a new image. This time, not a face, but a door, heavy, iron, numbered. Room 404, the same room number. From the first file in the case, the first disappearance. Lena didn't remember opening that file. She didn't remember how she got here. The whispers grew louder and louder, until her ears rang and her knees gave out. She dropped to the ground as the monitor blinked off again, leaving her in pitch black. But then, a single red light blinked to life above the hallway. Emergency lighting. That hallway hadn't been there before. She didn't care. She needed to move. She stood, slowly, dragging herself forward toward the crimson pulse. But as she passed the scratched phrase on the wall once more, she noticed something new underneath her signature. Written in trembling letters were 3 more words: you're already inside. Her breath hitched. She wasn't investigating the case. She was part of it now. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. Lena's steps echoed in the silence. But it wasn't the kind of silence that offered peace. It was loaded, watching, as if the walls themselves held breath. Her flashlight flickered, casting long, jerky shadows that danced ahead of her, taunting her with movement she couldn't control. Every few feet, the tiles beneath her feet changed pattern, from office flooring to old hospital linoleum, then to something that looked like scorched wood. She stopped once, running her fingers over the wall. It was warm, too warm, and it pulsed faintly beneath her touch. The air smelled like rust, not blood, older than that, like something forgotten in iron and dust. As she moved farther down, the emergency lights behind her blinked off, one by one, sealing her in forward motion. No retreat, only descent. Ahead, a door emerged, steel, bolted, scratched from the inside. Room 404, the one from the case file. She hesitated, fingers hovering just inches from the handle. It was marked with a fingerprint, her own. How she hadn't been here before, had she? A memory surfaced, a dream she once had of standing before this door, hearing something breathe behind it. It had felt real then. It felt real now. Swallowing hard, Lena gripped the handle. It was cold, almost too cold, like something had drained all the heat from the metal. She turned it. Slowly, a hiss of pressure escaped, as if the room had been sealed for years, and as it opened, she didn't see a room at all. She saw a replica of the precinct, her precinct, but twisted, abandoned, decayed. A version no one should have seen. She stepped inside, heart pounding, unsure if she had crossed into memory, or if memory had crossed into her. The replica was uncanny. Chairs were overturned in the bullpen. Paperwork fluttered slowly in an unseen wind, and the bulletin board, still bore photos of cases Lena knew had never made it to trial. The light was dim, a sickly orange glow seeping from flickering overhead fixtures, as if time itself had been arrested mid-failure. She walked past desks with nameplates of officers who had disappeared. Morales, Denton, even Chief Riley. The air was thick, like breathing through gauze. Lena called out once. "Hello." Her voice sounded muted, like it had no weight in this place. Something shuffled behind her, not footsteps, but the scrape of fabric against wall. She turned quickly, weapon raised, but there was nothing. Only her reflection in the glass window of what should have been the interrogation room. Except her reflection wasn't moving. It stared back at her, mouth slightly open, eyes wide, not in fear, but in recognition. Then it blinked. Before she did, Lena stumbled backward, bumping into a desk. A coffee mug toppled, spilling cold. Black liquid, not coffee, ink. It bled across the desk like veins. She looked again at the reflection, gone, only herself now. The moment she turned toward the corridor that led to holding, the sounds returned, voices, whispering her name in fractured syllables. La. Nah, not angry, not pleading, just waiting. She stepped forward. The hall had no, and it looped. She knew it did. She walked it once, twice, 3 times, the same mark on the wall repeating, the same broken ceiling tile above her. A badge discarded on the ground. It was hers. She picked it up, and on the back, written in red, "You were always part of this." Her breath caught. Was this some trap laid by the missing? Or had she been the missing piece all along? Her grip tightened around the badge as if it might anger her, as if something physical could hold her in a place that no longer obeyed the rules of reality. Lena backed away from the looping hallway and re-entered the bullpen, only to find it different. The desks were gone, the walls bled into shadow, and in the center of the room stood a single television on a rusted metal cart, the screen glowing with static, the kind that hums in your bones. Slowly, it flickered to life. A grainy video began to play, body cam footage, hers. The timestamp read tomorrow's date. In the footage, she stood at the very same station, except her face was expressionless, her eyes glazed. Another officer stood behind her, Morales. He leaned in, whispered something into her ear, and her recorded self nodded like a marionette. Lena stared, frozen. That wasn't memory. It hadn't happened yet. Then the screen cracked, as if punched from the inside. Blood seeped from the edges. She staggered back, nearly tripping over something soft. A jacket, her jacket, folded neatly. On the floor, and inside the pocket, a key, not to a cell, but to an apartment she hadn't lived in for years. She never told anyone she kept it. How did it end up here? Her pulse pounded in her ears. Her thoughts began fracturing. Maybe she had never left this station. Maybe she had never been called to investigate anything. What if this was the call? The moment every officer disappeared, it started not with a case. It started with a question they couldn't answer. And the moment they tried, the moment they asked why, something took their place. Lena felt it then, not just around her, but inside. Something was watching, and now waiting. The lights above flickered once more, but this time didn't return. Lena stood in near darkness, the only illumination coming from the faint glow of the television, now frozen on a single frame. Her face, but not how she looked now. She was older, more hollowed out, like the world had kept spinning without her and time had forgotten to tell her body. She stepped back, and the sound of her own breath became deafening, echoing off the station walls as if they were narrowing in. She tried her radio. Nothing. She shouted. Nothing. No footsteps, no creaking of doors, no hum of life outside. This place wasn't empty. It was sealed, preserved, a memory that had refused to decay. Her hand reached for the old key again, her fingers tracing the worn edges like it might unlock more than a door. Maybe it was symbolic. Maybe nothing in this building followed logic anymore. Lena turned, heart pounding, and retraced her steps to the lobby, or what remained of it. The chairs were gone. The front desk was a smoldering heap of ash, but the front doors were open, not broken, just slightly ajar. Beyond them, fog, endless, still fog, thick like cotton. She should have run, but her feet refused. Somewhere deep in that mist, someone whispered her name, not in fear, not in anger, but in recognition, like they had been waiting. And then she understood. Every cop that vanished hadn't been taken. They had been shown something that rewrote them, piece by piece, not erased, replaced. And the only thing worse than being lost was being remembered wrong. She took one last look at the badge in her hand. It had no name on it anymore, just a case number for 04X. Lena stepped through the open doors, half expecting the cold fog to push her back. Instead, it welcomed her, soft and silent, swallowing her outline with each cautious step. The world beyond the precinct no longer sounded like city noise or distant sirens. It was something else, hollow, like the earth had exhaled and forgotten to breathe back in. Shapes began to form in the distance, silhouettes, faint and fragile, like shadows with memory. They didn't move. They just stood, spaced out like a memorial. And Lena realized with dread that each one wore a badge. She recognized some of them, not faces, not clearly, but stances, habits, the way Torres always slouched with one hand in his pocket, or how Nguyen never quite looked forward. These weren't ghosts, they were echoes, people who had walked into something they weren't supposed to see, and couldn't ever walk back out of. Lena wanted to scream at them, ask what happened, but her voice caught in her throat like her body already knew the answer. The further she walked, the more she felt something was being peeled away, not skin, but certainty. Her memories began to scatter, details blurring around the edges. Her father's voice, once sharp, now sounded like radio static. Her own name, Lena, didn't feel like it fit in her mouth anymore. Was she being erased too, or re-recorded? Like a tape that could only hold one truth at a time. Then, in the fog, she saw herself, or what looked like her, wearing her uniform, smiling the exact smile she wore on her academy photo. It waved, then turned around, walking back into the precinct, replacing her. And the fog didn't stop her. It sealed Lena where she stood, between what had been and what the world now believed. The next morning, the precinct opened like any other day. No one questioned the officer at desk 2. Lena Caro, badge number 9431, as she filed her morning report, sipped her usual coffee, and greeted the team with a polite nod. Her voice was the same, her mannerisms precise. If anyone had stared too long, they might have noticed something in her eyes, not emptiness, but rehearsal, like the soul behind the eyes was mimicking the one that used to be there. But no one stared too long, not in a place that was already haunted by silence. The file labeled case for 04X was marked as transferred. Transferred to where? No one could say. The folder sat in the archives, untouched, except for a faint smudge that looked like a fingerprint. The names of every officer originally assigned were crossed out, as if they had never existed. Their desks cleared, their lockers reassigned, their lives paperless. Outside, the fog rolled in again, as it did most mornings now, a little earlier than before. No one questioned it. They simply closed the blinds and got on with the day. But in the basement, deep behind the old evidence room, a red light blinked on a screen that hadn't powered up in years. Connection restored, it read. Beneath it, a single command flickered, waiting to be confirmed, replace next unit. And if you were to listen very, very closely to the security tape from the holding cell that night, just before the signal died, you'd hear a voice not Lena's, not human. A voice that whispered, again and again. The first was accepted. Prepare the others. So the question remains, who are the people working in that precinct today? And more importantly, what happened to the real ones?